Welcome to At Home and Abroad with Harris and Walker. Join us each week as we follow our curiosity, diving deep into the familiar and the foreign. Reach beyond your front door as we uncover new perspectives, explore intriguing ideas, and have real conversations with the best guests. Ready for something different? Let's get started. I'm going to kick things off with a quote today, Harris. A quote from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. Okay, let's hear it, Walker. Well, he says, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. Well, that seems to be pretty sage advice, but help me out, Walker. What is the difference between compassion and, say, empathy or sympathy? That's a really good question. I think this is something that is often misunderstood. Sympathy refers to being able to understand what someone else is feeling, whereas empathy is more about being able to actually feel what someone else is feeling. Okay, so sympathy is more cerebral. I understand how someone might be feeling a certain way, and empathy is actually embodying the emotions someone else might be experiencing. You got it. Empathy requires more from us. Okay. So you often hear of people being referred to as empaths, right, these days. And I think I would describe myself as an empath, and probably you too, Walker. It can be exhausting, though, can't it? Particularly if your person is experiencing a difficult patch in their lives. Oh, it certainly can be, but we can also feel someone else's joy, which is a blessing. True. It's called positive empathy. Like when my youngest went to his prom last week, I had all the happy vibes for him. Yeah, of course you did. And I'm actually looking forward to the same this week. It's a really wonderful feeling to have happiness and joy for others. It is. And it's actually reflected in our own physiology. Cool. Yeah, according to Beth Wanson, executive coach and founder of Navigating Challenging Dialogue, in brain imaging, it can be seen that when we are experiencing positive empathy, the brain of the person having the actual positive experience and the person observing react in equal ways. Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, so now what about compassion? Well, the word compassion comes from the Latin compati, meaning to suffer with. So compassion literally means to suffer together. Okay. Here is a great definition from the Greater Good magazine. Compassion is a feeling that arises when you are confronted with another suffering and feel motivated to relieve that suffering, but you take action to help the individual who is suffering. So it's related to empathy somewhat in that you're in your feelings, but there's more motivation to alleviate the suffering of others. Exactly. But what about compassion for ourselves? We can often be our own harshest critics, can't we? We certainly can. According to Dr. Heather S. Lonsack, psychologists are also interested in the role of compassion towards oneself. When individuals view their own behaviors and shortcomings without compassion, they may ruminate about their faults and inadequacies in such a way that erodes self-esteem and happiness. The number of studies that are examining the benefits of compassion are growing. Well, it's certainly a worthwhile area of study. Compassion is crucial to the well-being of ourselves as individuals, but also to society as a whole. And of course, compassion is a key tenet of Buddhist philosophy and one that draws many to this faith. We are so blessed to speak with the Venerable Thubten Chodron today. Venerable Chodron founded Sravasti Abbey, a Buddhist monastic community in Washington, and is the abbess there. It is the only Tibetan Buddhist training monastery for Western monks and nuns in America. She also travels worldwide to teach the Dharma and has published many books on Buddhist philosophy and meditation in multiple languages. The Venerable Chodron is currently co-authoring with His Holiness the Dalai Lama a multi-volume series of teachings on the Buddhist path, the Library of Wisdom and Compassion. Thank you so much for being with us here today. We are so looking forward to this conversation. So I wanted to start off with one question, and this is, the ancient Buddhist philosopher monk Nagarjuna said that compassion accomplishes all aims. What did he mean by this?
Okay. He's speaking from a Buddhist viewpoint where your aims are not only the happiness of this life, in fact, your aim isn't the happiness of this life. That should come about as a byproduct of your practice. But from a Buddhist viewpoint, what do you want to go well is to have a good future rebirth, to attain liberation from samsara, to attain full awakening. And compassion is the key to all of that. Because actually, if we look at our happiness this lifetime, a lot of it depends on our ethical standards and how we live. Okay? So compassion is the wish not to harm others and the wish that others be free of suffering and its causes. So there's a very close link here between ethical conduct and compassion. Why do we practice ethical conduct? Because we have compassion for others and for ourselves. We don't want to harm others or ourselves. And so in that way, you accomplish the happiness in this life. You create the cause for a good future life. You set the foundation for attaining liberation and full awakening. So in that way, because he's talking to a Buddhist audience when he's saying that.
Right.
Yeah. But even if we just talk about it in a secular way, we can see that if we have compassion, then our whole life goes better, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We get along better with other people. We're kinder to other people. They reciprocate. So, we receive help. We have good connections with people that I think are really gratifying. So, compassion, gets us going in the right direction in our life.
Seems to be the secret ingredient.
Yes.
To accomplishing that happiness.
Yeah, and it's something the Dalai Lama emphasizes again and again. He often speaks about it in terms of kindness. And he says, my religion is kindness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, why? Well, basically, if you want to be a spiritual person, you have to get your life together, And how do you get your life together? I think compassion helps us to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it makes us more sensitive to other people's feelings and needs. It helps us reduce our obnoxious behavior.
Yes, this is important.
Yeah. So it really accomplishes so many good things in this life and then also for future lives.
I think it's really interesting, this link between having an ethical standard and finding a practice of compassion in your life. How does one do that? How does one know that someone's adopting an ethical standard?
Are you speaking, like about oneself? How do I know?
Yeah.
There's a few different ways. One is, how do I feel about different things I've done?
Okay.
Yeah. And some things I've done, I look at and I go, I don't want to ever do that again.
Right.
That was stupid. It was mean. It was useless. It was obnoxious. Finished.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's something I know that's part of my ethical standard. I don't want to do that.
Right.
Another thing is often you see how other people act, and if they do things that we think are harmful, usually our mind goes to, oh, they're a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
Criticize them, point the finger, they're bad. That is not at all helpful. When we see people doing things that we think are harmful, to think, I never want to do that. I never want to act that way. And then that too becomes part of our own ethical standard. I learn from seeing other people do something that maybe I've never done or haven't even thought of doing. And I see, oh, that harms others. It harms the person who did it. I don't want to get involved in that kind of conduct, even if the situation should come to me at some time.
Right.
Yeah. So that we can see too. Oh yeah, I have an ethical standard there too.
Okay. That makes it very clear, actually. You can look at your own experience, and also you can learn from others' experiences without ladening them with judgment.
Yep. That's
Right.
it.
Okay. So what is the difference between compassion and love?
Here again, Buddhism has very specific definitions. Okay. So, like I said, compassion is the wish that beings not suffer.
Right.
Yeah. So that they are free of suffering and the causes of suffering. Love is the wish that living beings have happiness and the causes of happiness.
Okay.
So they fit together. You wish them to be free of misery, you want them to have happiness. So they come together that way.
They complement each other perfectly.
Yes. Yeah. And we kind of need to cultivate both of them.
Mhm.
If you just cultivate compassion, but you don't think, oh, I want them to be happy, after they're free from suffering, oh, I never think about wanting them to be happy. That seems a bit strange, doesn't it?
Yeah. You're missing a half of a whole.
Yes.
And is compassion then wanting others to be free from suffering? Is that something that is innate to all of us, or is that something that we have to learn or cultivate within ourselves?
I think it's both.
Okay.
Yeah. We have there's an innate compassion, you know. I mean, you can see it even with very young kids, you can see it with animals not wanting somebody that they're close to suffer.
Hmm.
I was just reading an article this morning about one man who had Alzheimer's and he'd go walk out and he'd get lost and ever, but he had two dogs, and the dogs would follow him everywhere. If he got lost, the dogs stayed there with him. You
Right.
know, I
Yeah.
mean, the dogs had compassion and they knew something was going on with him. Yeah. So, yes, I think there's an innate compassion, but it's also something that we need to consciously cultivate.
Hmm.
Okay. Because we have this feeling of, oh, I don't want others to suffer. But then when we don't like somebody and somebody's harmed us, what do we say?
Sometimes you wish it on them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want them to get hit by a truck or go to hell, or, one of those nice things people say to one another. Um, you know, so when we see, oh, okay, there's part of me that wants people to be free of misery and its causes, but I also have a problem with my anger because when I get angry, that interferes with my compassion.
Hmm. Hmm.
I can't be compassionate when I'm ticked off at somebody. Um, so I have to do something about my anger too. And in the process of doing that, I have to build up my compassion and make it stronger so that when people do things like what I said, one question before, one answer before, is you see somebody doing something and you don't think it's suitable or it's harmful, then instead of getting mad at that person and thinking they're a horrible person and blah 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 blah, taking out our anger on them and our judgment on them, to say, oh, I know what that's like.
Yes.
I know what it's like to get really angry and to say all sorts of things that are totally stupid and obnoxious and cruel. I
Mhm.
know what that's like. So if I see somebody else do it, I mean, should be an object of my compassion because I know that when I act that way, yeah, I don't feel good about myself.
And you're suffering in some way when you're acting in from a place of anger. You are in suffering, and so that is deserving of compassion.
Yeah,
Well, that makes a
exactly.
lot of sense to me.
Yeah. But the trick is to do it.
Yeah, to actually practice it.
Yeah. But when we're in the heat of a situation, oh, we just fall back on our old dysfunctional habits. So this is where practice comes in.
So we practice in every aspect of our lives so that when we're faced with those really difficult moments, does it become easier then?
Yep, that's it.
That's the work to do.
Yes.
A question that's been on my mind is whether the benefits of compassion can be diluted by our motivations.
If our motivation of compassion gets diluted, then it's no longer compassion. Okay. So some of the ways in which our compassion gets diluted, I should say, is when instead of my focus being on the other person and their misery and wanting them to be free, I fall into what's called personal distress. Oh, I can't bear to see them suffer.
Right.
Okay. And this happens. You have a pet who's dying. You have a cousin, a mother, a father, someone you love who's dying, or somebody who's injured and in the hospital for an injury, maybe a young person. And it's like, I can't stand to see them in that state. It's so painful to me. When that happens, the focus is no longer on the other person and their situation. The focus is now on me. Okay? So we call personal distress a near enemy because initially it may look like compassion, because we don't want to see the person miserable, except it's not real compassion because it's focused on I'm miserable seeing them.
That's very good to know. Now, there's so much despair, strife, and tension in the world right now. I'm curious how compassion plays a role in our ability to thrive and grow in this environment.
Okay, this is one of the great challenges, but I'll tell you how I do it. There's probably other people who have many other ways of doing it. But one is to really look at that habitual tendency. And this is what's going on in the culture now, especially in the US. I think Canada might be a little bit tamer. This is how I practice with it is, because the tendency is to look at, some of these politicians, or they could be people who own businesses who are, making a lot of money off of illegal ways or off of warfare or who knows what, cheating people, overcharging people, whatever. So that our tendency is to look at those people and criticize them, and get angry at them and get jealous at them. Jealousy is an offshoot of the anger. Yeah. And then after that, what do? We get depressed.
Right.
And we fall into despair. Like, this person should be a leader who cares about society, and look what they're advocating, and this one and that one. Oh, this is so sick, and everybody's just out for themselves. And then, again, I'm so sad, I'm so miserable, I'm depressed, I feel awful. Who's the star of the show now?
Right.
Me. It's all about how awful I feel. Okay. And in addition, I'm angry at these people and I hate them. And And, I think the people who love to be angry, the question is to ask yourself, am I happy when I'm angry?
Right. Very good question.
Yeah, because if you look, actually, none of us are happy when we're angry. So of what uses anger to human happiness.
Right. And we're so caught up in our anger, we can't see it.
Yeah, because we don't call it anger. We call it being right.
Exactly.
And, if I think this, I am right. And anybody who contradicts me, who doesn't see things this way, they are wrong. So they are bad. They are terrible. We're putting people in boxes and then wondering why we don't have a lot of friends because we put them all in an enemy box or a good for nothing box or a.
Which is not very helpful for us, is it?
No, no. It's like, oh, I'm good because everybody else is lousy. Well, huh?
Yeah.
That's not something that makes you proud of your own work, does it? Yeah. So, the way I practice in this is just, all those people are objects of compassion. They're not objects of my anger and my judgment. They're objects of compassion because the people who do harmful things do it because they're miserable. Yeah. So somebody who harms another person, didn't wake up that morning and say, oh, the sun is shining, at least in Toronto, not here, but the sun is shining and I feel so happy. The world is wonderful. I think I'm going to go out and hurt somebody's feelings or punch them or nobody says that. Why do people do harmful things? Why do they lie and cheat and all this thing? Because they're unhappy and they're trying to be happy and they don't know that the real cause of happiness is ethical conduct and compassion and kindness.
Mm-hmm.
They think that they're really going to be happy by, starting a war on another country or, cheating people or, yeah. And so again, people who think like that, to look at them with compassion and wish them well, because if they were happy, genuinely happy, they wouldn't be doing those things that are so harmful.
Right.
You can take this on the level of groups, on the level of individuals. Maybe, somebody tells you off and presses all your buttons and calls you every name in the book. Why are they doing that? It's because they're miserable. Yeah. So I can have compassion for their being miserable. I also, need to look at my behavior. And if I did something that was obnoxious, I need to own it and be responsible for it and make amends with that person.
And then if we don't have compassion, it becomes a vicious cycle, doesn't it?
Yeah. I want you to suffer, so I do mean things to you to take my revenge. And what does the other person say? Oh, thank you so much for taking revenge on me. I'm so happy now. No, they don't say that. They say, I'm going to harm you back.
Exactly. Well, there's this feeling, I think, with some people that when somebody does something bad, that they don't want to act with compassion because that they're losing something, but they're actually gaining.
Yes. Some people think compassion is weakness.
Mm-hmm.
That if you have compassion, you're saying, oh, well, you just murdered somebody. That's okay. No problem.
Right.
No, that's not compassion. Compassion isn't a woman who is, beat up by her husband saying, oh dear, I love you and I know you really love me. You beat me up yesterday. You can beat me up today too. I have so much compassion for you. That's not compassion. That's stupidity. Yeah.
So how can our listeners learn more? How can they learn more about compassion?
Ooh, let's see. many of the Dalai Lama's books speak about compassion. I did a book with His Holiness called In Praise of Great Compassion. So there's that one. And, all of the books that I do have something about compassion in them. Actually, another good book, for people new with the idea, is by Jampa Tekchok. He's one of my teachers, Kensur Jampa Tekchok, and it's called Transforming Adversity into Joy and Courage.
That sounds very helpful. And we could put that in our show notes for our listeners to search out. Well, I suspect there's always more to learn about compassion, always more to read.
Yes.
This has been an enlightening conversation. We would like to thank you. We are very grateful for the opportunity today. You can find the Venerable Chodron online or on YouTube at Sravasti Abbey, or read one of her many books. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Venerable Chodron's explanation of compassion is really quite accessible. And though compassion may be both innate and something that we must cultivate within ourselves, some people seem to have embodied it more than others. Perhaps the best known might be Mother Teresa.
She has become almost a synonym for compassion. She was a Catholic nun who made it her mission to help the poor and alleviate their suffering.
Yeah, she founded the Order of the Missionaries of Charity in Kolkata, India, where nuns cared for the sick and destitute. She worked in India for 7 decades, caring for patients suffering from leprosy, tuberculosis, and AIDS. Through her compassion, she provided food, medicine, access to clinics, education, and care for children who had been orphaned. I love her interpretation of compassion. She says, compassion is the joy of sharing. It's doing small things for the love of each other, just a smile or carrying a bucket of water or showing some simple kindness. These are the small things that make up compassion.
Well, it's in the small acts as well as the grand gestures, Harris. And very fittingly, Mother Teresa received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1979.
And she did. She's also known to have crossed paths with another compassionate contemporary in India at the time, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, widely known as Mahatma, or the Great Souled One.
Oh, I didn't know they crossed paths.
Yeah, it's believed they had at least once. In 1947, Mother Teresa visited Gandhi in New Delhi. Gandhi was a revered Indian leader, advocate of nonviolent resistance, who led the independence movement in India from British rule. He gave a voice to the people of India and promoted peaceful, political, and social progress.
Not something we're seeing much of today.
No, probably because what might be missing today is the practice of compassion.
Once Gandhi was rushing for a train. In the process of boarding the train, he accidentally lost one of his sandals. He then proceeded to remove the other sandal and threw it off the train. When he was asked why he did this, he replied that whoever finds the first will now have a pair.
That totally says it all.
I know,
right?
It certainly does.
Instead of frustration or feeling loss, he transformed the experience into an act of compassion. He was known for saying, compassion is a muscle that gets stronger with use. The Venerable Chodron said as much too.
Oh, I believe it wholeheartedly. I don't think we can speak of these compassionate changemakers without mentioning Nelson Mandela as well, Harris.
Without question, Walker. Though the ANC, the party that Nelson Mandela founded, has just lost its 30-year majority in South Africa, it was Nelson Mandela that ushered in a new democratic era in the country and kicked apartheid to the curb.
That's right. Many will know that he was imprisoned, too, for 27 years prior to becoming South Africa's first Black president for speaking out against apartheid. He was a tireless human rights advocate who ultimately won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. To say that he lived compassionately would be an understatement.
It would. It was said somewhere that though the apartheid regime was the symbol of racism and oppression, Mandela was the symbol of compassion and empathy.
His own words define compassion so well, too, Harris. Our human compassion binds us the one to the other, not in pity or patronizingly, but as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future.
Well, the world is certainly a better place because of these beautifully compassionate people who not only tirelessly fought to alleviate the suffering of others, but often risked their own safety in the process.
Oh, it certainly is. And of course, there are many such people in the world today, known and unknown. But we certainly all have compassion within us and the power to alleviate suffering. Mother Teresa said, "Do not wait for leaders, do it alone, person to person."
Well, Karamal Haq is one Indian man of action. He is helping to ease the suffering of his fellow citizens in Dalabari village in Jalpaiguri district of West Bengal. Karamal transports those in need of medical care to the hospital with a bike ambulance.
A bicycle?
Yeah. Patients are strapped to his back during the 45-kilometer trip. Can you believe that?
Holy smokes.
I know. He was inspired to do this when his own mother died. He was unable to find an ambulance to get her the medical help that she needed in time, and he swore he would never let anyone else experience the same. He assists the people living in more than 20 villages.
That's truly remarkable. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there's no shortage of opportunities to help the suffering, is there, Harris?
Sadly, there are not, but not all demonstrate compassion. In fact, the opposite sometimes. There are many instances that we can point to that are born of greed and hate rather than compassion. And perhaps others act without compassion because they themselves are feeling threatened or are even potentially mentally ill. But regardless, the lack of compassion hurts us all.
It certainly does.
We always have a choice, though, don't we? We can choose to be compassionate and we can practice compassion, as we learned in our conversation with the Venerable Chodron. That choice can sometimes be very difficult, though, especially when it's at the risk of our own safety or that of our loved ones.
Oh, so true. There could be many reasons why people may not be willing to express compassion, I would think.
Yeah, according to Paul Slovic, a psychologist at the University of Oregon, when it comes to mass suffering, we can fail to grasp the enormity of the situation. He refers to this as psychic numbing. We experience a loss of sensitivity with the large numbers. He found that this can happen even when there's just more than one person suffering. Isn't that shocking?
That is.
And people can also feel a false sense of inefficacy.
What's that?
So this is when we feel as if acting on behalf of the suffering won't have any impact. Slovic says it's influenced by the fact that you're only helping a portion of the problem. There are many other people that you're not helping, and that gives us negative feelings. That warm glow you get from helping gets hijacked by that negative element in the picture.
And yet many people can look beyond this and act regardless.
Yeah, exactly. Like as Mother Teresa said, never worry about numbers. Help one person at a time and always start with the person nearest you. You can have a big impact with the smallest of actions.
Oh, you certainly can. Even just a gesture of kindness to those down on their luck can be meaningful. So why don't more of us engage in this kind of thing?
Well, according to a somewhat depressing 2022 study, people actually avoided being compassionate when they were given the choice. Compassion was perceived as being more cognitively taxing than empathy and objective detachment, and opted to feel compassion less often to the degree they viewed compassion as cognitively costly.
Well, that really surprises me, considering how many benefits there are for those who practice compassion. We know that when we express compassion, it helps create and build social connections, which contribute to happiness, positive self-esteem, and overall well-being.
Yeah.
And of course, those who receive the compassion really benefit too.
Absolutely.
For example, patients are said to experience lower levels of anxiety when their doctors express compassion. There's also a connection between compassion in the classroom and higher levels of increased cooperation from students and even better learning.
Well, there's no surprise then that compassion in the workplace has become a pretty hot topic. So let's take a moment again and talk about self-compassion. We aren't always that compassionate towards ourselves, are we?
Oh, most definitely not. But I know a great exercise we can do to practice self-compassion.
Okay, cool, Walker. Tell me all about it.
Okay, first, think of something that bothers you about yourself.
Okay, not too difficult.
Okay, keep that in mind. Then you write a letter from the perspective of a compassionate friend to you about that very thing.
Okay, so I see where you're going with this, and I kind of like it.
If you don't want to write a letter, you can simply imagine what a compassionate friend might say to comfort you, but I would think that it's more powerful if you write it down.
Yeah, I agree. It's a little bit more objective and free from that critical inner voice. And I think this letter might just be a little bit less judgmental too, and more kind. It may, in fact, reduce your own suffering.
Exactly. Now that you have this practice, you can lean on it to help you calm that inner critic and strengthen your self-compassion. His Holiness the Dalai Lama once said, "We can never obtain peace in the outer world until we make peace with ourselves."
Thank you for joining us at Home and Abroad with your host, Harrison Walker. If you enjoyed this episode, you would be a real gem if you would rate and review our show. It helps us to grow and expand our reach. You can also subscribe to follow us each week as we continue the conversation. Find us on Instagram at Harrison Walker or visit us at www.harrisonwalker.com. We have great merch, just saying. And of course, we would love to hear from you.